So tonight we're going to talk about the dark alley. And I think before I talk about it, I'd like you to do your own reflection, just similar to what we did with edge work. So let's just first talk about what the dark ally is. First of all, let's just talk about the dark. Then we'll talk about what makes it an ally. So what is the dark? The dark is things that you don't want to happen to you that happen to you. Some of those things are things that you have no control over. In Hero's Journey terms, there are certain calls that come into your life that you can't refuse. Something happens over which you have no control, and you have to navigate it, you have to live through it, you have to survive it, you have to endure it. Other things happen to you that you don't want to happen to you, and you have some part to play in it. Maybe you get a bigger lesson than you bargained for on your quest. So the dark can come to you in many ways. And then the question is the dark always a bad thing? Or is it sometimes an ally? Is the dark sometimes a gift? Does the dark sometimes bring something so valuable that you would not have gotten it in any other way? So I'd like you just to reflect for a few minutes on your own experience with the dark. What was one of the darkest times in your life? And how did you, again, just like we did with the edge work, how did you feel about it? How did it come into your life? How did you navigate it? How did or do you endure with it? How did you come out the other side of it? If you transformed it, how did you transform it? So just reflect for yourself, and most of us, I think, have more than one experience with the dark, but just think of one that was meaningful, most meaningful for you. And just take a few minutes to do your own rapid journaling so that it's up for you, and then we're going to talk about it. So take just a few minutes. Okay, if you're still writing, you can keep writing, but if you're willing, I'd love to just hear a couple examples of a dark ally. Zovik.
So the darkest time in my life that I experienced was when I developed Graves' disease and hyperthyroidism. And if you don't know what hyperthyroidism is, it's an overactive thyroid. And it had gone undiagnosed for maybe 8 months or more. My body was completely ravaged. I was inflamed so much that there were days I couldn't walk or even put on my own clothes. I lived alone in Brooklyn. This was in 2017. My hair was falling out. My body was swollen. My eyes were popping out of my head because it creates thyroid eye disease. It makes you look like an alien. My whole face was distorted. And I was by myself. And I was scared to ask for help. And I was also very ashamed that I had gotten sick because most autoimmunes come from stress. I brought it on myself. I worked a full-time job, I had freelance clients, and I taught 7 yoga classes a week. And I was also looking for love, like hard. So I was just under constant catabolic energy, forever. And I was so upset and angry, and I went into do mode, and I was like, I will do everything. I will see the endocrinologist, the naturopath, the acupuncturist, I will do it all, and I did it hard. That doesn't work. And I was just terrified and alone because my biggest fear my whole adult life was being sick and being alone and having no one to take care of me. And that's exactly what happened. And that was when I decided it was time to move, and I left New York. But my hair was falling out. I mean, my body was out of my control, and I was in pain every day. And I just thought, this is how it's going to be forever. I didn't know that there was going to be an end. I got dismissed by my doctor. He's like, you asked too many questions, I can't help you. So I felt and it's really difficult to find specialists in New York City. It's like very difficult. There's so many people there. So I just felt profoundly alone. And now I understand that my body was screaming at me to pay attention, and it was screaming at me to remind me that my values had been supremely fucked up, and staying there longer than I needed to because I thought that I needed to prove something. That was all, it was a gift. It was absolutely an ally. And now that I'm in remission and it's been 5 years, when I have any stress, my body responds with hyperthyroidism symptoms right away. I feel the jitters. I start to sweat. It's like my body going, slow it down, slow it down. And so I'm grateful for that, because I wouldn't have recognized how badly I needed to slow myself down and stop trying so hard.
Yeah.
I was just trying so hard with everything.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to work that hard, and I worked myself into the ground. So it was a very, very dark time.
Yeah.
And because it's not a really well-known illness, I had to prove myself over and over again to medical people. Are you sure you don't have this? Are you sure you don't? I mean, over and over, and just dismissed and not listened to. And so I really had to become my own advocate. So I was alone in my home, but also alone within the medical system. And anyway, so that was my dark.
Yeah. Thanks, so good. Jeremiah, Michelle.
Hard to talk about, but there was a school shooting like a week before I graduated college, and I didn't know anyone who died, and so I used that as an excuse for a long time. Every time I felt bad about the shooting, I'd be like, but you didn't know anyone who died. And so it's like, you shouldn't, and then I ended up drinking really heavily for the first 5 years after college, and spent a lot, and then was chewing a lot of nicotine gum and not sleeping, and would go through periods where I would basically faint, sort of like my heart would palpate, and I would get really dizzy, and then I would not really sure what was going on, like huge sort of anxiety attacks. And it sucked. It felt like everything, it felt like I didn't get to graduate college, because graduation was kind of this no one really wanted to go to graduation, and it was just kind of I didn't even take my exams. And so I'd worked so hard in college, and then it's just you kind of get pushed out the door, and then just it felt like everything was falling apart for a period of about four or 5 years.
How did you navigate that? How did you come out the other side?
I had a mentor at my job who had been kind of gently telling me he did yoga, and that I don't remember exactly how, but I knew he was the guy to talk to. And I went to him one day and I was like, hey, do you know about meditation? I need to know about meditation. And he was like, yeah, in fact, I do. And he brought in this book, Mindfulness in Plain English, which is a great intro to meditation, and took a lot of time and walked me through it. And I started meditating every day for a long time, and just started getting insights of this has to change, this has to change, this has to change. Quit drink. So led to me moving to California and quit drinking. But it took probably another 9 months. But that was definitely the bottom, and then things started to come up.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeremiah.
Yeah.
Let's do one more. Daniel.
In 2012, I started this design thinking thing with a friend and some acquaintances, and it kind of accelerated. It turned into a company, and I spent 3 years pretty angry and frustrated with my partners. I didn't know how to grow a business. None of us, it seemed, did. And finally, I came back from a vacation to what I thought was a catch-up meeting And it was one piece of plain paper with green marker scribbled on it. That was my exit offer. My two partners had, without the fourth sort of silent part at the time, basically was like, so we think the future of this company is us and not you, and here's what we're offering you. And I basically was like, so my job for the next month is to tell you how to do my job and then to leave? And they were like, yeah, pretty much. And I sat in Bryant Park so confused, like completely destroyed, because I'd given literally every moment, every second of my existence to this thing for 3 years. And that was like the weirdest summer, because I discovered that my lawyer was no longer my lawyer, right? And they were like, you should probably get your own lawyer. And I did. I got someone to negotiate on my behalf. I backed them into a deal that made them hate me more. And then I had a non-compete where I had to disappear off North America in order to we don't want you doing anything design thinking related in North America for this money. And so I basically disappeared into Asia and Australia and got very lucky. This was my dark alley. I was catapulted into a whole other world, but I spent 2015, that summer, just being like, I guess I'm going to learn how to surf while me and my lawyer play this out. I learned how to prepare really well for legal meetings so that they aren't so expensive. And I spent a lot of years bitter. I tore my ACL that winter in Australia. I came home, I had to fix my ACL, and I spent I think it was another 2 years before I thought maybe I should try prototyping working with someone else. I think it's still a dark ally. Working alone is a lot easier than collaborating with other people. But that process of working through those feelings of anger and sadness and realizing what a terrible, terrible business partner I was and how miserable I made them, having to look finally at how did I create this? Right? How much of a child was I acting like? Yep. And then just working through my PTSD of any time I would see two people who looked even remotely like my partners in the subway. It's it's still it's a long journey. Yeah. Which is why I've started doing this podcast series, interviewing co-founders about how the fuck do they do it. Yeah. And Doug was very helpful on that. Yeah. He's one of my bright eyes.
Thanks, Daniel. So everyone else has a similar story, right? We've all had darkness. There's a story which I know many of you know of Milarepa, who was a Buddhist teacher, and he was living in a cave meditating, and one day he went out to gather firewood, and he came back and the cave was full of demons. So the first thing he did is he tried to just chase them away. And they just sat down and made themselves comfortable. And then he thought, well, I'm a Buddhist teacher, I'll just teach them. So he started to teach them, and they got even more comfortable. And then he thought, oh, okay, maybe they have something to teach me. So he said, okay, maybe you have something for me, so I'll just listen. And all but one of them disappeared. Now, I know that many of you know the answer to how he gets rid of the last demon, but just hold that for a little bit. We all have experience with darkness. And there is kind of a constellation of how it tends to show up, at least in my work coaching entrepreneurs and leaders. And so I want to give you just a simple way to think about it, and then we're going to go talk about it more deeply. So by the way, if you're ever going to do trainings, I recommend you get good at drawing star people. Star people are good. So here's you, and then there's this problem. outside of you. That's life. All of us, we will always have problems as long as we live. And if you are coaching an entrepreneur or a CEO or someone who is really on an aspirational quest, they're trying to create something that's complicated and involves the collaboration of other people and lots of resources and so forth, you are inviting problems into your life. But most of the time we can pick the problems up, here's the problem, and I can put it down. I don't want to mark up the chair back. Put it down, and then I can come back later and I can pick the problem up and I can work on it. And that's, that's daily life. We're always dealing with problems, but we pick them up, we put them down, we work on them. Worry is when you pick a problem up and you can't put it down. That's worry. You ruminate. Your mind is racing at night. You can't sleep. That's worry. When you are overwhelmed with problems, then you're inside the problems. That's what I call fucked. Fear, uncertainty, confusion, exhaustion, and doubt. And if I've done a lot of work with entrepreneurs, and almost always if you work with people over a longer period of time, like if you create clients that you're working with for at least a year, and they're working on some pretty ambitious thing, almost always they'll go through fucked. They'll go through some really challenging period where they're about to lose their funding, or some really critical person on the leadership team is quitting, or it's something that'll bring them to the sanity threshold where they're really afraid of being overwhelmed. And the way that shows up often is fear, uncertainty, confusion, exhaustion, and doubt. Fear is panic or anxiety. You're so overwhelmed that you're beyond your stretch zone, it's beyond edge work, you're in the panic zone. And so what do you do when someone is afraid? One thing you can do is, the antidote to fear is courage. And courage means literally, it comes from, bless you, it comes from a French word which means heart. So one solution is heart. If you are trying to create something so aspirational, if you love it so much, that will get you through a lot of fear. Zovig had a lot of fear when she was going through her dark period. But you loved your life enough that you weren't going to give up. No matter what the doctors said, if the doctors ignored you, you were going to become your own advocate. So that kind of love and persistence, and that's what gives you courage to persist when the obstacles seem overwhelming. So one of the things you can do when you're coaching someone who's afraid is to get them back in touch with their love. What is their motivation? Why is this important? Why is it worth doing? Why is it worth, suffering this dark passage? That in itself is not the ultimate solution, right? You need to try to find a way to provide safety. Where are they safe? Can they find a way to conduct smaller experiments, to back up and find a smaller domino, something that's safer, and take some action that's less scary? Can they find other allies? What can they do to feel safer? Or what can you do to help them make whatever edge they need to work through more safe? What support do they need, and how can you get that support? Uncertainty is unpredictability, is like really being lost in the unknown. And one way to help navigate that is that there's almost always something that you do know. So you take an inventory of what you know. If there's uncertainty, you say, fine. So you can't predict what's going to happen. There's a lot that you don't know. What do you know? Because sometimes when you're really that overwhelmed, you forget what resources you actually do have. So you help the person take an inventory of what they do know. Confusion is interesting. Confusion literally means to fuse together. So confusion is like it's like disorder and a mess of things that are all jumbled together and so hard to make sense of. So, and it can be overwhelming when you're confused. You have so much. Sometimes a client will just give you this download that it's really difficult to track because there's so much going on. And it sort of all jumbles together. And so one thing you can do to help them is you can defuse. Instead of fuse things together, you can take things apart. And so again, just like with dealing with the unknown, you can have them take an inventory of what they do know, or have them formulate questions so they can, and think of who might have some more information so that they can gather information and make the known space bigger and the unknown space smaller, maybe. With confusion, you help them separate things out. You say, okay, wait a second, you've got a lot of things to deal with here. Let's just make a list. Let's just physically, sometimes when I would meet clients in person, I've done a lot of sessions where I would say, they would do a download and I would say, wow, that was a lot. Let's just take an inventory here of actually what we're dealing with. And I would take out Post-its, the little Post-its, and we would just write one issue or challenge or question or problem or whatever it is, and we would put them on the wall. And sometimes there'd be a lot of them. And then we would sort them. And then we would prioritize them, and we'd say, all right, and then we kind of look at, all right, if we were to look at these, what one thing out of all these things would have the biggest leverage, make the biggest impact? Basically the wayfinding question. If someone is lost in a bunch of detail or overwhelmed with a lot of challenges, ask them, all right, so if you were to distill all of that down to the most important question you most want an answer to, what would the question be? Or, of all these things, part of the problem when people get confused is they're no longer making important distinctions. So, for example, a distinction might be, let's say you're coaching someone around their career, and they're all confused because they have all these interests and all of these opportunities and everything. Part of the reason they're confused is they've confused a lot of important distinctions. And so one distinction, for example, is, okay, well, which of these are really about form and which of these are about essence? Like if they're trying to choose between a lot of options, a common challenge is that people fall in love with different forms, whether or not they really fit. And so you say, all right, let's look at these. Which ones of these are more about form, and which ones of these are really closer to your essence? And of course, since we're trying to help the person get more clear about their essence, we might help them make the distinction between what essence is and what it isn't. So we might say something like, oh, you have all these interests that you've been sort of distracted by. Is this a passion, or is it your essence? Is this something you're just really interested in, or is this your best way of serving from your essence? Maybe it's just a passion, not really your essence. Or another distinction is purpose. Is this a passion or a purpose? Is this something that's really meaningful, that you feel that you're longing to create? Is this the best expression of your essence and service? Or is this just something that you're really interested in that's fun? It doesn't mean that you can't do both, but if you're trying to figure out your career, you have to figure out what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to. When someone is confused, depending obviously on the content, a good exercise is the one I talked about earlier about yes, no, maybe, or is, isn't, is it? You know, separating out. If they're trying to solve a problem or prioritize, you can say, well, I know that this is important, I know that this is less important, I don't know how important that is. Again, it's just you help them to clarify, okay? And then you can, again, you can look at levels of creation, and you can then identify, so what level would have the most impact, and you start there. That's how you diffuse the situation. You pull it apart and you find a place that has the most leverage to work on. Exhaustion is simple but not easy. Exhaustion, the way I think of exhaustion is the right stuff. Sleep, thoughts, undertaking, food, and friends and family. So sleep is, most people when they're overworked and stressed, they just don't get enough sleep. I recommend naps. I've gone into my room and just closed my eyes for 10 minutes on almost every time that we've had, free time. And it really makes a difference. But so, making sure that you're getting enough sleep. The more stressed you are, time, of course, is precious, but you want to make sure you get good sleep. I'm a big fan of sleep aids. So I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to promote anything, but it's good to know what works for you. Sleep thoughts is, like Jeremiah said, one of the best ways to manage your stress, especially when you're feeling fucked, is meditation. I'm not a meditation teacher, but I encourage my clients to meditate. Undertakings means the right activities. For most people, that means exercise and so forth. I'm not a big exerciser, but it also means that you're managing your time well and you're focusing on the right activities. Food, obviously, most people when they're stressed start to eat less healthy and so forth. And then friends and family is don't lose touch with your friends and family or whatever your support system is. So a lot of clients will tell me, oh, well, that sounds really good, but where am I supposed to find the time to do that? And I say, yeah, you can do it. It's surprisingly effective actually to do it in microdoses. You can microdose, I say, just call your beloved for 5 minutes during the day. Or, just text somebody. Or you can meditate for 2 minutes and benefit surprisingly from it. In fact, when I started meditating again, I have a very spotty on-again, off-again relationship with meditation in my life. And I hadn't meditated for a long time, and I wanted to start meditating again. And I started by meditating 1 minute every morning. And then after a week, I did 2 minutes, and after a week, 3 minutes, and then 5 minutes, and then whatever. So even if you only have a couple of minutes, or even if you can only lie down for 10 minutes, all of this I know sounds very simple, but it's just like your clients don't think of this. And so I tell them to microdose. I tell them as leaders, look, if you're stressed, have a gratitude practice. Just take a minute at the end of the day and think what you're grateful for, what you accomplished. Have a generosity practice. Call one of your teammates or one of the people on your leadership team and say, hey, I just wanted to check in with you. Is there anything I can do to help you? For 5 minutes. So microdose. The last one is doubt. Doubt, in a way, is more personal because this is where often the love threshold comes up. So the person is doubting their ability or they're doubting their success. There's a real crisis of faith. And so how do you deal with doubt? Actually, I said that rhetorically, but it's a good one. So I'm actually going to ask you that. How do you deal with doubt? And there's a mic runner. If someone wants to. Gary.
How do I deal with doubt? I sometimes try and figure out, am I procrastinating? Am I incubating? Am I drifting? Am I in quicksand? I mean, just trying to figure out, why am I not taking action, or if I'm doubting my abilities. Sometimes I'll reach out to a friend or a colleague to try and get a reality check and another viewpoint.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Daniel, and then Emily, and then Vanessa.
I'm sure none of the rest of you have a problem with self-doubt and judgment. But I struggle with a very strong inner critic, and it was really flaring up very strongly earlier this year. And I have collected over some time a spreadsheet of nice things that people have said about me. So when somebody sends me an email and responds to a newsletter, or a thank you after a workshop, anything that anybody said to me that flares the smallest smile. It's the smile file is the name of the Excel spreadsheet. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to look at the spreadsheet at this moment. I was really feeling dark. And so I went through it, and I copied down ones that were particularly lit me up, and put them on sticky notes. And then I clustered them. And then I sat with my therapist, and I read them to him, and I cried a lot. Because it was so hard to feel the things that people had said about me, even though I knew that they were asked for, unprompted. I had to get in front of someone else and say, this person said this thing about me. I don't believe it. I want to believe it. I don't believe it. I'm a garbage person, but they said this thing about me. And so then I made a giant poster of those things written large enough so that I could see them every day. All I have to do is turn about 30 degrees, and I can see these dozen things that I have squished into my inner system through like handwriting, telling it to someone, and then making a giant poster so that I can just slowly mush it back into my substance.
Yep.
And now I believe it.
That's great. So, yeah.
I also have a pretty vicious inner critic. One of the things is I'm honest about it with people now that I trust in my life, and new team members that I'm building trust with. And I also make art. Like, one of the things is, like, if I feel like if I try to just like figure out the doubt, and like I think Daniel said quicksand, like if I try to figure it out, it's like I'm too much in my head about it, and like my head, me by myself in my head is a bad neighborhood. I don't go there. It just makes it worse. So, and some people have been asking how long I've been a DJ, and I don't remember ever not being a DJ, because I've always, like, mixtapes are my therapy, and making, putting music together and like doing something that feels like flow state for me is a way to get me to like zoom out and remember that embodied feeling of something that just is, it's my essence. It just comes naturally to me. It feels good. And then I can like reapproach the problem. So it's like when I'm feeling like inside the cloud, it like gets me outside the cloud, and I can like reapproach it and see it from a new light.
Great. Thank you. Vanessa.
So mine is less about, sorry, like like kind of this inner world as much as a little bit more practical really recently. So Wednesday, we actually made an offer on a house kind of unexpectedly. And then Thursday, we rescinded the offer. And we made the offer really quickly out of the blue. We weren't really looking because it was like check, so many things. It was like super ideal. And then immediately it felt like, I don't know, this is going to be hard. You know, just the doubt came in, and then we rescinded, and then they of course said, oh, well, would you like to make a new offer and with new details and yada yada, and it's like, well, maybe, and then this, and analyzing and assessing. And what helped me was, is this coming from scarcity? Do I believe there's going to be no more ever again houses that is going to be ideal? Yeah. Can I trust? Because it's not the right time for us in so many ways. Can I trust that there will be something there when it is better time? And then I thought, is this coming out of, who will I become?
Oh, good.
And I thought, I'll be more stressed, I'll be anxious, I'll be frustrated, I'll be overwhelmed, and I will push myself to do it all.
Yep.
And I'm working really hard to not be my pusher me. And I really love where I live now. And so the question of who will I become, and Hector, my husband you've met, he said, I just don't want you to have one more thing on your plate right now.
Yeah.
And a new house is another big thing. And that was like, I don't want us to become more in this world. It's it's a half acre, 3 blocks from the beach.
Yeah.
But
Great.
there are more houses in the world near
Thank
the
you.
beach.
Yeah, thank you. These examples are really... Was there someone else? Oh, I'm sorry.
Sometimes I have had good results with telling myself when I feel like something is going to be a disaster, and I've done all the sorting out of like, why am I doing this? But I just feel awful. I tell myself, that's good. That's exactly how I should feel. Because this is indicative that I am on a threshold. I've come to the limits of what I know. And what I want is on the other side of what I don't know. So I heard a great quote. I was doing some research on creativity, and I heard this talk that Taika Waititi did, where he said, every opening night of your art piece should feel like it's going to be the end of your career. And then he said, you have to create a little chaos. And I just love that. I feel like that's just sort of it's such a threshold encapsulation of crossing a threshold.
Great.
And of course, if you like his work, you know that that's not what's happened to him. So
I don't know who you're talking about. Who is this?
he is a film director that he directed Thor, but he's a very compelling, interesting, funny, artistic risk taker.
Okay.
And I think he gave a talk at Google or something about creativity, and he said that. But I just love that.
Great.
Doesn't always work,
Yeah.
but it works a lot.
Yeah. Thank you. So these are all very interesting examples because, I said doubt is the most personal of all of these. And it shows up in different ways. For Daniel, it was really inner doubt, doubting himself. For Vanessa, it was doubting her decision. It shows up in different ways, but however it shows up, it's always very challenging. It can be very stressful for people because it's more than the unknown. Like the unknown by itself is difficult to navigate, but this is the unknown, and what you're afraid of is that what you don't know is something really terrible. Like the unknown by itself, I'm excited when I'm in the unknown because that means I'm in a place of possibility. If I'm where I know things and I already know, I pretty much know what's possible. In the unknown, anything can happen. That's where I like to live. That's why I like being on a quest, because I don't know then what's possible. But if you're doubting Then the unknown is, the fear is that what you don't know is bad. Anything that you don't know that's going to happen could potentially be bad. You're afraid of making the bad decision that'll be really wrong, or you're afraid that what you don't know, like for Daniel, it's the love threshold. What you're afraid of is that what you don't know, Daniel, is that you're actually an asshole and unlovable, and everybody's going to find out. Yeah, exactly. So what Daniel did, however he came to it instinctively or whatever, is exactly one of the best things you can do. When I was starting as a coach, believe it or not, I was very insecure when I first started. I had no idea if I was any good as a coach. I recommend having an altar. I mean, it doesn't have to be an altar. My altar was the wall behind my computer. When someone would send me an email and tell me how great the coaching was or thanking me or something like that, I would print it out and just tape it to the wall. And after it took a while, but after I had some recommendations on LinkedIn, I copied all the recommendations and I ran them through a word cloud, one of the word cloud websites. And then I posted the word cloud on the wall, because what was common about a lot of the feedback was insight, or I don't even remember what they were now, but whatever they were, it was sort of reinforcing, okay, people are giving me feedback that what I'm doing is helping. I'm creating some value here. By the way, one of the things I recommend you put on your altar, whether it's your desk or your wall or whatever, is the card that you wrote last night, so that you can remind yourself of all those positive messages that you've always wanted to hear. You're now your own parent. In Hero's Journey terms, there's something called the Father Atonement, which I call the Parent Atonement, because some women pointed out to me that it's also the Mother Atonement. But what it is, one of the ways that I think of that is, by the way, I don't want to go in too much of a digression, but just it's interesting that in the Hero's Journey there's a boon, and there are actually some archetypal boons that Joseph Campbell talks about. And the boons are things like the elixir theft, the apotheosis, what he calls the Father Atonement, and I'm missing something. But anyway, short story is, the way that I interpret that is the Father Atonement, or the Parent Atonement, is about becoming your own parent. You have to become an adult and learn how to take care of yourself, and stop trying to solve the problem that no longer exists, which is getting your parents' love. It's okay. You're still going to get dinner. You're still going to be clothed and fed, but you're going to do it now. And you're going to love yourself now and take care of yourself. Anyway, so it can be really helpful to have a kind of altar, or whatever you want to call it. In other words, when someone is doubting themselves, you gather evidence. A lot of people who are doubting themselves, it's imposter syndrome. So again, their capability is up here and their identity is up here. So what you want to do is raise their awareness of how capable they are, and raise their identity, and get them to see themselves the way that other people see them. If they don't have the feedback, you can encourage them to ask for the feedback. If it's an executive and I don't want to do a 360 with them, I'll encourage them to do what I call a self-directed 360, which means I give them some guidelines. I have a handout that I give them if anybody wants. I think I may have posted it to the forum somewhere. But basically what it is sort of instructions on how to have conversations and ask for feedback. And so you go to the people around you and you just ask for feedback. And then you get to see yourself the way other people see you. And other people are not the final judge on who you are. If one person, if one person gives you negative feedback, well, it might just be that person. But if you talk to 5 people and they all give you the same negative feedback, then maybe there's something to that. So it's good to do some reality testing. And as coaches, we can help our clients do some reality testing and gather evidence. When it comes to doubting decisions, then it's really about helping them make better decisions. And often what gets in the way of us making better decisions is, again, we confuse the different levels. Like we have values conflicts. So an example is someone will tell you, oh, I really want to be in a relationship, and I met someone and they seem really interesting, but I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt. So I don't know, should I tell, like Michelle said, should I say I love you? What if they don't say I love you back? So there's a conflict between the value of intimacy and the value of safety. You can't, there's no guarantee of safety in a relationship. You have to open your heart in order to find out whether there's a relationship there. You have to risk being hurt. You have to risk showing up as yourself and being rejected for who you are. Otherwise, you're not in a real relationship. So there can be that conflict there. And that can make the decision of, do I go in or do I protect myself? You can have that kind of doubt. I mean, that's how it can show up regardless of the content. So this framework, I'm giving you kind of a framework a way to think about it for yourself and for your clients. It's interesting, recently Google had to do some layoffs. And the CEO of Google sent out an email that I should probably have read. But anyway, one of my clients was in a similar situation. They had to lay some people off. And they said, what do I do? We've got to, things are not good. We've got to do some layoffs. And I said, well, it sounds like you're pretty fucked. Because they were really stressed out and they were afraid and they didn't know what to do or how people would react and they were confused and so I said, listen. So I walked them through the model and I said, listen, when you talk to all hands and you have to tell the company that you need to lay some people off, the first thing you do is you remind them of why they're here. You remind them of why they love this company so much and the mission and what they're doing here, the work they're doing is very important and why it's important to them. The second thing you do is you tell them, you're transparent. You tell them what you do know and you tell them why these changes are happening. And you tell them as much as you reasonably can so that they're always going to have questions and they're always going to make up stories. But whenever you have a trauma like that in an organization, people will always assume the worst and make up stories that are not helpful. So tell them as much as you can. There are a lot of things that will be impacted by this. Let people, separate it out. Let people know exactly what the issues are that they need to pay attention to. Make it as clear as possible. And tell them what you do know about what's so encouraging. The layoffs were actually not because anything bad was happening, but it was kind of a reallocation of resources because the company was going through a different stage of growth, and so the priorities were shifting. So apparently, I haven't read it, but apparently Google, the CEO of Google, did essentially the same thing in his email to employees when they had to do layoffs. So it's a helpful way to think about how to navigate that. Okay. So let me check in with you. Questions, comments, and then we're gonna take a break. Thoughts? Tatjana.
I have a follow-up to the story that Vanessa shared, because my doubts also come with difficulty committing decisions. Yep. And so I when I heard your story, Vanessa, it was two things, right, that created a lot of anxiety in me in your story because I really related to it, which is, one, it's a decision that you can't easily unmake.
Yep.
Okay, so it's not like you can test it out, experiment with a new house, and then change your mind, right? So it's committing yourself to a certain course of action. And then the second thing is like not really knowing what the personal cost would be and what other, options you're closing the door to. And that level of doubt, I still don't understand, like, what are the tools to navigate that type of, like, because you're literally closing off other possibilities.
Right.
That because you're actually taking away living in the zone of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Through that decision, right? You're like, oh, I like to live in the zone of uncertainty. So do I. So that's why I don't make committing decisions.
Yeah.
Right?
But you also have to ask yourself what it is you really want. I committed to Michelle. And I closed off. If you find something that you really want. So here's the thing, you have to be careful about making I don't know what to call it. I'm trying to think of what to call it. Categorical labeling or something. In other words, you want to be careful of confusing categories. So if you're creating some opportunities for yourself, like when I'm creating clients, if I don't get a client, my attitude is, I'm abundant, the world is abundant, I'll find another client. What can I learn? If I did a dream session, I didn't get them, I asked myself, okay, what can I learn from this? How was I? Did I coach them well? Did I screw up? Did I talk too much? Probably. Okay, what can I learn from it? But after that, it's like, I let it go. I don't give it a second thought because my attitude is that the universe is abundant, right?
So you and I completely, I agree. The question is and no offense, but in my sort of, there are real decisions that you make that can lead you to things. And, a relationship you could easily undo. I mean, it's going to be painful and difficult. Right. But when you have children, you can't undo that, right? So
yes. Yes.
You can't easily undo that, right?
Well, but you can undo it. But let me finish the thought. So what I mean is you want to be careful about confusing categories. Right. So there are certain categories where I feel very abundant. And like you say, there are certain categories where I can undo things or where the harm done, the downside is very manageable, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are certain categories that that attitude doesn't work very well. Like if you're really serious about having a beloved, you can't say, well, there's a lot of fish in the sea. I'll just see how this is. And if it doesn't work out, if I don't like her, if she's, whatever, I'll just find somebody else. That doesn't work very well if you're trying to create a beloved. It doesn't work very well if you're trying to create yourself as a coach. If you say, well, I'm abundant, I'll find some other form, it doesn't work very well if your intention is to really create from your essence and yes, that you can try lots of different things, but you're not going to be, there's not an infinite number of possible ways of being congruent. Being congruent, you're looking for that match within yourself. Buying a house, that's a bigger commitment. We don't know what would happen if Vanessa bought that house or not. We don't know if it's the right decision. But the reality is that Vanessa is going to make whatever she decides mean something. Okay? And what she makes that mean is the really important thing. She could get the house and get out of it, and then she would make that experience mean something. You can be married and have kids, and yes, you can't undo the kids. But it doesn't mean that you don't have freedom to do lots of things in that relationship. There are people who get divorced every day. And some people make that into the best thing that could happen to them. So nobody is trapped in, I shouldn't say that. There are people who are trapped. But neither one of those do you not have any ability to influence them or to go on a quest. You know, I mean, you could go on a quest to find a way to make the situation you're in as good as it could possibly be, maybe better than you can imagine. Or you could go on a quest to change the way that relationship works with your kids. And it would be, I'm not saying it'd be easy.
I just don't know what are the tools to help people, maybe like me, who have a real difficulty making one-way door decisions.
Yeah. Well, it's the short answer to that is it's everything we've been talking about. There's no magic. I mean, there's no magic wand. If there was, the magic wand would be maybe, what if this wasn't a problem? That's one way to think about it. And the other is, if you woke up tomorrow and you'd solved it, what would it be? If you woke up tomorrow morning and it wasn't a problem anymore, how would your life be different?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Yeah, sure. What I do is I flip a coin. Yeah. And then while it's under my hand, I think about which side I want it to be on. Yeah. So what I do is I flip a. Hello?
Yeah.
Often when I have a lot of trouble making a decision, like when I left a job that paid really well to become a coach. And after I made the decision, I was like, oh, that's what I wanted the whole time. Like I knew very clearly what I had wanted. But generally what I do is I flip a coin. And then, you know, like let's say it's heads, and then while it's covered, I like think about the anxiety I have. And that tells me which one I actually want to do.
Yeah.
And I also find there's a lot of depth and commitment. So like even if you like F up and like maybe you like we think these things are like there's so much creativity within the commitments I've made that are like long lasting that it just you cut off half the board and you play within that new half of the board, but you can still play like a great game.
Yeah.
And that temptation to second guess that whatever you might have done otherwise would have been better is a fool's game, right?
Yep.
You never know what would have happened if you had walked through the other door. So the only place you are is where you are. Love it. If you don't love it, change it.
Okay. But Greg had his hand up after. You can go there and then Greg.
One thing I was thinking about is, like if you're thinking between, and the question you asked about kids, because I'm thinking about kids, and I'm rumbling with this question, but I think one question as like a tool could be, you know, if you're thinking of either or decisions is, well, what scares me the most about the other decision? Because when you posed the question, it kind of sounded like black and white options or all or nothing options. So what scares you the most about either option? And then when you identify that, it could be more, well, what would it look like if I had this and not that, or like create something more fluid. So that might just be like a tool to think about.
Thanks, Ariel. Greg and then Vanessa.
So what I've noticed as we've been talking about the fucked sequence is that 3 out of 5 of these are emotions. Mm-hmm. And we're relating to these as though they need to be fixed or solved or changed. And so a different way of thinking about it that I have espoused more recently is that there is no fixing emotions. First of all, there are no bad emotions to be fixed. There's no good emotions or bad. There's all emotions. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to fix them.
Yep.
So one thing that I've been exploring with and playing with and learning is that it's an order, the order of operations. What's the first thing to do before I try to change something? And with an emotion, it's to feel it. Mm-hmm. Like feel it all the way through. If I'm afraid, stop resisting feeling afraid. Face the fear. If I need to cry, rage, do whatever. Mm-hmm. But feel these feelings, and then they usually dissipate. Yep. The energy behind them, I can then reallocate, reclaim, and put towards my goal. And then the second amount of energy that I would otherwise have spent resisting it, pretending it wasn't there, denying it, repressing it, is also reclaimable to put towards whatever I'm doing. So I guess I want to reframe this conversation away from trying to fix and respond to emotions and probably stick in a pre-step of feeling them all the way through without resistance or without repression.
Yeah.
And then, if it's the case that that's a recurring feeling or it's an obsessive feeling or something I can't get rid of, then I might think about how can I change my thinking? Because the thinking is always a preemptive to a feeling. I've thought about something, I've interpreted something, I've come to a conclusion, I'm assessing something. How might I think it differently? And if that avenue doesn't work, then behaviors. What could I do that would change my feeling or change my thinking? And that's the triangle that I work with a lot of my clients is feelings, thinkings, doings. If you don't like any one of those apexes, pick one of the other two as an intervention portal. Because I can always change my doing. That'll change how I think and feel. I can change my feeling, it'll change how I think and do. Or I could change my thinking, it'll change how I feel and do. So anyway, just want to offer that.
Yep. So I just want to clarify something, because I agree with everything you said. We're not trying to talk people out of their feelings or fix their feelings. Any feeling fully felt changes into something else. If you have someone who's afraid and you let them feel their fear completely, it'll change into something else. If someone is sad and they cry, and you let them fully cry, they'll cry and they will stop crying and they'll feel better. So I just want to clarify, I'm not suggesting that we're discouraging them from feeling their feelings or we're trying to fix the feelings. The feelings, this constellation of feelings, is a response to a very challenging situation. And what I'm suggesting are ways to help the person navigate the challenging situation. So I agree with you, and thank you for that distinction. But just understand that we're not trying to discourage anybody from feeling their feelings. I have cried with a lot of clients, and I have, let them be confused, and I've had them be afraid and fully experience that and all of that. And then we want to see what that fear is. What is the message behind that fear? What is it trying to tell them about the situation they're in and how they might respond to it differently? So, yeah, thanks for that, Greg. Vanessa? Yeah, sure.
I heard two different things from Tatiana, that it was either like, we kind of went towards how do we make decisions when you can't undo the decision, when you've actually decided and it's cut off something, versus Tatiana spoke to, in my life, a way I show up is not wanting to fully commit to a decision, and how is that, what's that like?
Yeah.
What does it serve me? What do I get? What do I not get? All of that kind of like poking and curiosity. So I don't actually know, Tatiana, if you're asking for how do you make this decision, is more what conditions have created this way of operating, and maybe how it sounds like you might want out of that way.
Tatiana, do you want to respond to that? We're going to take a break in a few minutes, just so everybody knows.
So I believe I truly have always valued optimizing for serendipity, which means leaving all my options always open.
Yeah. Okay. So let me tell you a short story, and then we'll take a break. Many of you know this story, but this is actually a post-Hive story for my friends from Hive. After one of the Hive leadership trainings, they had a party at Hive headquarters, which at that time was just across the street from Dolores Park. And it was, and I forget what that building was called. Do you remember, Alex? It was like the Christian Science. It used to be, it looks like a sort of a palace. And the side of this building that faces Dolores Park has these steps, and there's these 3 huge wooden double doors, and it's a beautiful building. And so they were having this party there, and I got into a conversation with a young woman who was graduating college, and she couldn't decide what to do. And she was telling me, I don't know, I'm getting some interest from people. I'm thinking about maybe I should become like an investment banker, or work with, there's a politician that wants me. She had all these options, and she didn't know what to do. And I said, do you know who Marcel Duchamp is? And she said no. Marcel Duchamp was a surrealist artist, and he had an apartment in New York where in the corner of one of the rooms, there were 2 doorways and 1 door. So to open one door was to close the other door. And he actually did it as a play on words. Apparently in French, there's some saying that basically translates into a door is either open or closed. And so he was saying it can be both open and closed, right? It's just a playful thing. But what I said to her is, so I told her about this, and she turned around, and there's these 3 magnificent double doors. And she said, oh my God, the doors. So I said, the problem is, if you try to keep all your doors open, if you try to keep the door open, yes, you have 2 open doors, but there's a good chance you're going to bump into the door. You've got to decide what door are you closing so you can fully open another door. So what I had her do is I had her tell me her options as if they were doors, and I had her go through each door and see what was on the other side. And you could feel it just from, it's sort of like Jeremiah's coin flip. You could feel just from the way she was describing the options which ones really appealed to her more, and which ones were more resonant with her essence, and which ones were self-interest, status-seeking, scarcity, and survival. And so she got a lot of clarity that day, but she didn't make a decision that day. What she did was she went on a quest to clarify and understand, and so she talked to people, and she visited people, and interviewed, and gathered all this information, and then she made her decision, and she went through the door, and she closed all the other doors. And so if you're struggling with a decision, then that's your quest, Chun. And you go on a quest. Is it okay if I'm a little personal with you for a little bit?
You're so cute. No, you don't want to be personal with us at all.
I want to share with you just some of the things that I know about the dark ally. And part of the reason I want to share with you is because, and I know many of you know at least some of this story, if not all of it, but one of the reasons I want to tell you the story is that coaching from Essence is actually very personal for me. That's one reason. And the other reason is that I feel like I know something about the dark ally in my bones. Not that you don't know it, because I think most of you also know in your bones a lot of what I'm going to say. And that's one of the beautiful things about the dark ally and about edge work, is when you do edge work, you don't have to look at your notes anymore. Like, the only reason I have looked at my notes from time to time, is because I'm tired. I know this stuff in my bones, and so when you do edge work, you know it in your bones. Once you get through that edge, it's etched in there. And the dark ally is the same way. The dark ally doesn't make a shallow impression on you. It makes a deep impression on you. So there are things that happen to you that you can't control. You didn't choose them, and you don't want them. And when those things happen to you, you make a choice, or you make a decision. And you decide what those things mean. You can decide that you're a victim, and why do bad things always happen to you, and why me? Or you can decide, even when it's completely out of your control, that what happened to you is a gift, that there's something there, there's some opportunity there. Yes, it changes the direction, the course of your life, and there's some opportunity there to make something meaningful out of it. The way I think of the dark ally when we bring it on ourselves, and many of the times when we bring it on ourselves, we don't see it that way. We don't think, I didn't bring this on myself. But many times the dark ally, we actually do bring it on ourselves. And one way we bring it on ourselves is that we don't go to our demons. In other words, we don't turn towards everything. We were talking about this at lunch, I think. I used to have a bracelet that said, turn towards everything. And then when I felt like I had learned how to turn towards everything, I gave it to one of my clients. But we don't turn towards things. We don't face things. We don't tell the truth about ourselves. We don't face the truth about ourselves. Not to pick on Daniel, but I think, Daniel, your story was an example of where you didn't go to your demons, and so your demons came to you. And so part of the dark ally, what the dark ally brought you was an opportunity for you to look at all the ways that you were showing up and contributing to creating what happened to you. And good for you. Like, you made it through that journey and you got the lesson. Right? Okay. I'm sure there's more. There's always more. But you can see how it's like people who are in a relationship for 30 years and one morning they wake up and their beloved says, I want a divorce. It's not because they woke up that morning and decided that they wanted a divorce. They were unhappy for a long time and one day they couldn't take it anymore. And so for the person who they were divorcing, that person had demons that they weren't facing, and so the demons came to them. In 2014, when I went through in this relationship that I was in that was pretty dysfunctional, fell apart, and then I went through my dark passage for 2015 and 2016, that was my demons coming to me. I had been living in a way that was, I'd been living from self-interest, status-seeking, scarcity, and survival, and I had been showing up in a relationship. I'd been showing up everywhere half-hearted and self-interested and non-committal and all of that. And so, I'd been sort of skating through my life that way, and finally it just didn't work anymore. My demons came to me, and basically what they said was, you have to change. And so my life had to fall apart for me to see that. It really fell apart. There was a long period in 2015 and early in 2016 when I was suicidal. I would wake up every day and go down to the... So I had ended up living in a room in a house with these 3 people who were less than half my age, and I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor in the bedroom with no furniture and a box of books and a lamp, and that was about it. And I would tiptoe down to the dining room, which was what we had turned into an office, and every morning I would fire up my iMac and I would search how to kill myself. And sometimes I would pace and I would say, how did this get to be my life? How did this get to be my life? I have managed to create the exact opposite of everything I've ever wanted. I don't have a beloved. I don't like my work. It's not fulfilling. It's not satisfying. I don't have good friends. I'm fucking sleeping on a mattress on the floor in a room in a house, and I'm almost 60. This was not at all what I imagined my life was going to look like. And sometimes I would pace in the morning and I would say, I want to live. I want to laugh again. I want to love again. And one day I was so depressed, I was searching on Google and looking up ways to kill yourself, which was like my favorite thing to do then. Look up ways to kill yourself. Shotgun is actually the best, but I don't recommend it for you and for anyone who might ever watch this. Please don't kill yourself. It's the biggest mistake. But I would read about using a gun, and anyway, I'd stumbled on this formula where you would get these different chemicals together and you inhale them, and so I went to, this was the lowest day of my life. I went to Walmart to look, thinking about it now, it's kind of painful and funny. But I went to Walmart to look for these chemicals. And I'm looking for these chemicals all over, and I can't find them. You can't buy them. You can't buy them. Don't try it. But I'm looking all over Walmart, and finally I realized, okay, they don't have it. That was a fucked up idea. But as I'm leaving, there's an end of aisle display with these glasses, drinking glasses on it, that are imprinted, live, laugh, love. I took a picture of it. And then I went outside and I sat in my car and wept. And I realized that if I was willing to kill myself, there was nothing to be afraid of. What could possibly be worse than that? What could anybody do to me that would be worse than me killing myself? I can embarrass myself, so fucking what? I can be rejected, so what? I've already rejected myself. Like, there's nothing I could imagine worse than wanting to kill myself. So when I was done weeping, I got in my car and I went home, and that was, it wasn't, I don't want to suggest that it was an event, but that was a real turning point for me. I just thought, fuck it, I'm just gonna start living my life and try to find out who I am and do that. Like Dolly Parton said, find out who you are and do it on purpose. And so, and so that was a real turning point for me. And I committed, just like I committed when I went on, when I created my spreadsheet and I was looking for Michelle. I committed to showing up in my life as fully as myself as I could, and trusting that things would be better. And it didn't take very long before I started to love my life again. One of the things that happened was Hive. I'm really grateful for Hive. I met incredible people like Alex and Brandon and who else? Jesse was from Hive. Oh yeah, you came to Hive after, but they were small group leaders with me. So it was just, I really just started putting myself out there and risking. So the reason I share that story is because that's an example of when, if you don't face your demons, if you don't go to your demons come to you. And it's not at all uncommon for us as coaches to be coaching someone whose demons have come to them. So we have to do our own work of going to our demons. And I'll come back to that in just a bit. I started putting myself out there. I started taking the risk of being rejected. I started showing up the way I wanted to. I had to reinvent the way that I worked. At some point, I decided that I was ready. toward the end of 2016, toward the fall of 2016, I got my first $10,000 a month client. And I thought, okay, you know, for me that was a little bit of status seeking or whatever, but it was also validation. Like I'd done the first year of my coaching this way, almost all of my coaching, probably 90% of it was pro bono. You know, I just coached as many people as I could. But then I finally got this client that was sort of my dream scenario. And I had written on a Post-it that my dream was to do work with, I can't remember it exactly now, but it was something like I wanted to work with intelligent, you know, creative, loving people doing the impossible in beautiful places, something like that. Look around the room. What do you see? Beautiful, intelligent, loving people. You're all on a quest to do the impossible. Where are we? In a beautiful place. This was my dream. So my life started to come together in 2016. Actually, in December of 2016, I had my second heart surgery for atrial fibrillation, and I was in the recovery room. I had to stay overnight, and I was alone, and I didn't have anybody to be with me. My niece's husband drove me to the hospital, and I didn't know where I was going to live in January because I'd lost the room in the house. The people moved out, we lost the lease, and I couldn't find people to move in with me. And then I had applied for this apartment, but they hadn't gotten back to me, and it was a week before the end of the year, and I was in a hospital recovering from heart surgery. And I didn't know if in a week I was going to be basically homeless or crashing somewhere or whatever. So then I did get the apartment, and then in 2017 I moved into my apartment in Emeryville, and that's when I got connected with Singularity University, and my life started to improve. And then in September of 2017, the most miraculous thing happened. The most miraculous thing. But better late than never, right? Better late than never. And then began the happiest 5 years of my entire life. There's only one fly in the ointment. And that was 2 months after I met Michelle, I got diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. Now the reason I'm telling you this story is because this is not my demons coming to me. This is a call I can't refuse. This is a thing that I would really prefer not to have happened that has happened and that is beyond my control. And so now here I am stuck with stage 4 prostate cancer. Now what do I do with that? I want to share with you that I am a big believer in the responsible use of entheogens and other substances. Entheogens are substances that enable spiritual experiences. And one of the substances that I've worked with is a drug called ketamine, which is legal and has been used very effectively for deep depression. And I have done some work with it to help me come to grips with how do I have a relationship with cancer that is positive. So rather than being a curse, it can be a gift. And one of the things that I discovered was I can't really do anything about my cancer. Like I would try to I did a lot of meditation and a lot of exploration. So what do I do with this? And what I realized was, and also like, what the hell is this? Why me? Did I do this? It was like there were times when I was depressed when I would pace and say to myself over and over again, could I just die? Could I just die? Like, did I create this? Did I invite this in? And I really don't believe it. I mean, there's certain genetic things and all that. Who knows why I have cancer? What I realized was it doesn't matter why I have cancer. The only thing that matters is what am I going to choose to have cancer mean for me? Because cancer won't tell me what it means. I decide what it means. There is no cure for cancer, at least now. So I thought, well, if there's no cure, is there healing? To heal means to become whole. So I thought, I know all about becoming wholehearted. Maybe cancer is helping me become whole. Early in my diagnosis, a friend of mine said, I know someone else who has prostate cancer and they're maybe a little further along in their journey. You should just have a conversation with them. So I met this guy in a bar, and I don't drink, but he had a beer and I had a Coke or whatever. And what he said to me was, I've come to view my cancer as a gift. And at that time, I'd just been, a short time before diagnosed, and I truly thought it was crazy. But now I understand it. Cancer is a great teacher. I think of it as the uninvited guest. I didn't invite cancer in, but now it's in. It's like it's in my body. It goes everywhere I go. And I'm trying to evict it. I'm trying to make it as inhospitable as possible, but it's still there. So it's the uninvited guest. So I figure I have to have a relationship with this thing. So I've decided that it's a teacher. And one of the things it's taught me is every day is precious. We were just talking about this on the break. Like, you're all here. You all came from so far away. Think of everything that had to happen for you to be here, and it's almost over. We don't like to think about death, but we're all mortal. And not only are we all mortal, but everything in our life ends. This experience will end sometime tomorrow, after lunch for some of you, and by 5 p.m. for the rest of you. And then you'll go. Everybody will go on their way home. And it's not that these relationships will end, but this experience, this container, this moment, this preciousness will only happen once in our lives, and then it will be gone. Cancer taught me really in my bones, I mean, cancer is literally in my bones, to appreciate that. And it also taught me, I was pretty good at it before I was diagnosed, but cancer also taught me if there's something you want to say, don't wait. So I never hesitate to tell somebody I love them now. I tell Michelle I love her probably 100 times a day. Possibly. When we're home. Not here, because I'm busy. I'm working here. But I'm working here, but I'm going to love you the whole time. That's what we say to each other. I'm going now, but I'm going to love you the whole time. These are good. These shouldn't be secrets, though. People need to know this. You've got to love as much as you can every day. Never second guess telling someone you love them. Don't be afraid. That's the other thing it taught me. I mean, I was already learning a lot about that, but again, the funny thing about heartbreak is heartbreak makes you want to die. Cancer makes you want to live. It's a funny thing. So cancer for me is a teacher. I am incredibly grateful to all of you because one of the main reasons I wanted to do this and have it recorded was so that I could give it away because, and I don't want to be melodramatic, but I just don't know how much time I have. Maybe I have a year, maybe I have 5, maybe I have 10. Maybe they'll cure cancer in my lifetime. It's all about getting more runway and hoping that I'm, in line for whatever the next treatment is. I just don't know. So I have this sort of dual focus where I dream long term. I dream about what could be possible and what I might want to do, and then I live for the day. And I try not to have any unfinished business every day. There's an American Indian saying, I'm not sure exactly where it comes from, it's a good day to die. In other words, I try to be complete every day. And so just in case I don't wake up in the morning, I want all of you to know just how grateful I am that you're here and how much I love you and appreciate you. And when I say that, I mean that sincerely, and I mean it in a way that we talked about yesterday. I love you because I see you, and I wish every one of you well, and I appreciate what every one of you has to bring to the world. And my deepest wish for each of you is that you bring your essence into the world without any fear and with fire, and you just create and express yourself in a way that's congruent with you, in service in a way that's congruent with you. The way, if I reflect back, the way that I came out of my depression was really a few very simple things. One was I read somewhere that if you had a gratitude practice, it would help you. Actually, one of the things I read, my favorite Rumi quote is, the cure for pain is in the pain, which is to Greg's point. I had to let myself break down and weep. I did a lot of weeping back then. I had to really cry. I had to sit with my pain, and I had to look at myself, take a really hard look at myself, and see how I had created everything I didn't want. But then I started this gratitude practice. And so one of the things that Michelle and I do is, usually at dinner, is we talk about what our highlights of the day were. And so we're going to do that when we close this evening in just a little bit. But one of the things I highly recommend to you is a gratitude practice. And you can either write it down. I would keep a journal and I would write things down. Or if you have a partner or beloved, you can have a ritual like Michelle and I do and just acknowledge all the good things that happened to you that day. Sometimes we don't wait until dinner. We just look at each other and say, it's such a good life. Oh my God. We're so lucky. So gratitude. And the other thing was generosity. I read somewhere, I don't remember where, that if you're depressed, help somebody. And so I helped somebody. Yeah.
Just one thing to add, because I struggled with this too. The gratitude journal is collecting the data. Maybe it's like the same thing I did with my inner, from my inner voice. After a year of keeping a gratitude journal, I put it on sticky notes and made it down. And that's where I think the payoff is. It's like, oh, this is everything that feeds me in the life. These are the things that actually create joy for me. Right. And then you can go, okay, more of those things. Great. That's the payoff.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things I did actually when I was really depressed is I made, not just a gratitude practice is you take a few minutes or you note 5 things that you're grateful for or whatever, but one day I sat down and I made a list of everything. And then that's when I started feeling really abundant. I thought, oh shit, I've been so ungrateful my whole life. I've got all of this stuff going for me, and I never really appreciated it. And then I started feeling really abundant. I thought, wow, I've got so much. I don't have to fear anything about being generous. And so, and I didn't know what to do to help people. The only thing I knew to do was to coach, so I just started coaching. So gratitude has been a big practice for me, but I think of gratitude as the beginner's practice. Because you can be grateful for all the good things that happen to you. The advanced practice of gratitude is to be grateful for everything that happens to you. So now I'm grateful for everything that happens to me. I'm grateful for cancer. I hope I have it for a very long time. I've learned a lot from it. Then generosity is the advanced practice. And the sort of the beginner's practice of generosity is being generous with your time and money. Money especially is the beginner's practice, because anybody with money can give money. Time, anybody with time can do take on a pro bono client. But real generosity is being generous with your being, bringing your whole self to it, letting people see you, giving yourself away. The advanced practice is grace, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow morning. So here's what I'd like you to do, and thank you for indulging me in my story. But what I'd like you to do now is to reflect on your own story. And what I want you to do is, I want you to reflect on something that, a dark ally that maybe is a little bit unresolved for you. Like Daniel said, you're not done, So the dark ally could be something that happened to you over which you had no control. One of those calls you couldn't refuse. Or it could be one of those dark allies where your demons come to you because you didn't go to your demons. And I want you to do two things, and I'll give you a few minutes to reflect on it. The first thing I want you to do is to think of a dark ally that's unfinished, and I want you to just think of what else it might mean for you. How might it be a gift? What might it mean that could be useful to you? And so I want you to think about what it could mean. In other words, give it a meaning that is helpful. I want to be clear here too, I'm not talking about being Pollyanna. I'm talking about really deeply looking at it and saying, what might be the lesson or the gift here? And then what I want you to do is to think about what demons you need to go to. Because we all have demons that we haven't gone to. The way Milarepa got rid of the last demon was he put his head in the demon's mouth and said, "Eat me if you wish." And the demon disappeared. So like Greg said, when you feel a feeling fully, when you turn toward everything, when you face the demon and you put your head in the demon's mouth and you don't resist it anymore or run from it anymore, you face your demons, they disappear. Maybe they don't disappear completely, but you have a different relationship with them.